Lawrence has kind of lit up the room with his inspirational presentation. And we now have Ani Dasgupta as our second keynote speaker this morning. Ani is the Global Director of the World Resources Institute Ross Center for Sustainable Cities. And he is a member of WRI's Global Leadership Team. The World Resources Institute is routinely ranked as the #1 environmental think tank in the world. And Ani's Sustainable Cities program is generally regarded as first in class. Prior to joining the World Resources Institute, Ani served as the Director of Knowledge and Learning at the World Bank, the Director of Knowledge and Learning. And that title really tells you everything you need to know about my amazing friend, Ani Dasgupta. So Ani, you're up.
Clint, thank you so much. And Clint and Emma, you guys, I'm so impressed about this forum you organized. It's a privilege to be part of it. I was there last year. The fact that Dentons, the world's biggest law firm, focuses on smart cities and brings these amazing people together, I just am so impressed, Clint, that you do this. Only regret I have, last time I was there, I met some amazing people over coffee. That I will miss this time, so hopefully you'll invite me back next year when I can actually meet them again. I just want to say what Lawrence Jones talked about trust is such a critical point, because all the things I'm going to say, I'm going to talk about cities. What does this moment look like for cities? And end of it, we have a moment to take big opportunities, to take big actions, and all those actions require multiple people to work together. And that can't happen without the trust Lawrence Jones talked about. So it resonates a lot with me, Lawrence, what he talked about. I'm going to use some slides, Clint, and I hope I can successfully share my screen. Clint, please let me know if you can actually see my slides.
You're, yes, perfectly.
Okay. So I want to take a moment, actually very connected, Lawrence, to talk about, what is this moment for cities? And we are looking at, and I will, as Clint asked me to, take more a global perspective than past speakers before me on that, but Dr. Lawrence Jones already took a global perspective. This particular moment, this pandemic that we all are hearing about, living through, talking about, and reading about, is very much a urban. Cities are really the epicenter of it for many reasons. You saw a wonderful map of where electricity is, or electric cities in the world just now. It's very much, this is a United States map. This is true for cities across the world. This is from Johns Hopkins tracker, just a week and a half back. And as you can see, where the prevalence of diseases is actually where the urban centers are across the world. It's very much an urban phenomenon, simply because of people live there, density, but also how the disease travels is actually more people are connected. The question is, and it is, you've been reading this, I'm guessing most of you live in cities and been looking at the constant, very good material that coming through from the news about how the cities are impacted, how it's impacting every systems in cities. It's not just disease or employment, how this is connected. New York Times wrote a fantastic series called The Cities We Need out of this. But it's really impacting every system in cities. And we are overwhelmed with information about this because it's there every day and because we're in the middle of it. I want to take a moment to step back and say, what are we learning from this? What is it that we did not know about cities or pandemics that we're learning from it? Of course, this is my take on it, but I think there are a few things that are quite striking that we're learning. The first thing is this crisis, though it didn't start among the poor, when it came to Italy or even to New York, the disease, it didn't start among the poor, but it's clear right now from evidence that the impact of it, both of the disease and the economic fallout that has happened, because it's overwhelmingly, disproportionately, the pain is shared by the poor. And there is data I could share with you across, and I want to talk about what that means. The second thing we're learning very much, and I hope it's vivid to all of you, then when the low-income people, those poor or semi-poor, who are taken out of the workforce, either because they're sick or because they can't get to their work because the transport system doesn't work, which in the euphemism in the United States is essential workers, a city actually ceases to exist. Cities don't work if the trash is not getting picked up, if the bus is not driven, if the services that we're dependent on, if the workers, or service workers in restaurants are not working. I hope that this allows us to actually witness how important different population, different income groups are for what we know as a city to work. You already heard that how people are rethinking work and how work would work, how cities might look different. This, I don't think we appreciated before how social infrastructure like health, like this, how critically connected it is to economic infrastructure like work, employment, and physical infrastructure like public transport, for example. How when one thing fails, how all these things interconnectedly, we, people like me who work in cities and talk about systems, how cities are systems. But historically, I would argue with you, we have talked about how the economic and physical systems are interconnected with each other much more. Really not understanding in depth how social systems or social infrastructure is so interconnected to physical economic structures to work. How this disease has made employment not work, and how healthcare or lack of healthcare has made most of employment really jobs not happen. So this will force us to think about resilience, as you just heard from our earlier speakers, very differently than we used to. The last one I want to make, one point I want to make is cities are seeing a significant drop in income because of business are not working, the services that provide public transport is not working. This is where cities need to do more. They need to step up, actually do more. They are actually very constrained with budget. This requires a different kind of partnership that requires national government to step up, international organizations step up and work with cities. I'll talk more about this. We are not seeing as much of that as we would like to see. All this is kind of slightly negative, but something positive is also happening in the world. There is a real space for political invention, a political space to do new things, because we've been forced to do new things. We all are sitting at home and doing a Zoom when normally we'll be in a hotel near Dentons' office doing this, because we are doing things differently. That has allowed us cities to invent things, and there's a lot of experimentation of things cities thought they could not do before. They're doing now. So this is a moment for reflection, because cities are observing the cleanest air they have seen for decades. In Beijing, in China, in India. In India, a city in northern India is being able to see Himalayas, which is 250 miles from that city for the first time in 50 years. Some people who've grown up didn't even know they could see the mountains from the city. So that has created a political space for change. And I think that is the important portal, the portal for us to move forward. Going forward, a collective response is needed. I mean, I can't overemphasize this. And Dr. Lauren Joseph's point on trust is so important because of this. Though I'm going to talk about cities, it is not enough just to look at cities. I think cities can do a lot of things, and they have to, but also national government, international agency have to help cities for the reason I just mentioned of what's happening to finance. So I'm going to quickly talk about what's happening in cities, and then quickly talk about what's happening internationally on this topic of cities in the next few minutes. In the cities, I think the most striking thing is how the impact of this disease is so uneven, so unfair. This is just the data on race impact across race in the United States. And as you can see, about 100,000 people, 40.1% non-Hispanic white are people who are impacted by the disease, compared to 221.2 people per 100,000 of Alaska Native and Native Americans. So as you can see from this impacts very differently, has impacted this. I could draw a similar chart on poverty, but any kind of minority. And this is not just happening in big cities, this is happening everywhere. Everywhere across some big cities in New York, Chicago, but also the small cities, smaller cities in the United States. This impact of minorities and also poor, which are overlapping in most places. Now, this is a very important point about how this is happening. And this idea of poor people in cities is a critical point, because cities are, as you saw from Dr. Jones's graph, it's growing. It's growing across the world, and 2.5 billion more people will live in cities. All the green bubbles you see are cities that will grow most in, and the light green are the cities going low, and the red dots are cities that are not going to grow, which is mostly in the Eastern Europe and Japan, as you can see. And these cities that are going to grow are actually not all big cities. These are actually, most growth will take place in smaller cities in the world. And a lot of poor people will live in the cities. The urban poverty is actually increasing. Global poverty actually decreasing. So the number of poor people overall out of the 7 billion people in the world actually, and this is a big success for the globe on the last, has been. But number of poor people as a percentage of people who live in cities is actually increasing, simply because of the shift of population that is taking place. So our ability to actually focus and make sure we are resilient, and the poor people in cities are resilient for the success of cities in the future, is a critical. And the reason this is important for resilience is that community you see in your picture right now, out of 3.5 billion people who live in cities, 1.5 billion people today live in communities like this. A picture from Mumbai, which means you can't social distance if you live in a slum. If you don't have water, you can't wash your hands every time you're supposed to wash your hands. You can't do those things that the CDC is asking us to do. And the more troubling is this particular moment of COVID is, according to estimates, it's going to put 70 to 100 million people back in poverty. Will erase most probably 3 or 4 years of fantastic progress against poverty that we have made. This idea of resilience in poor people in cities, and the importance of success of cities, how these population actually does, is a very important point for us to think about as we go forward. And the projections right now of what was going to happen to poverty pre-COVID is the dark, the black gray line. But as you can see, this projection of poor negative progress on poverty is actually increasing every month since this projection started. This is a very disturbing outcome, and it will impact cities in a dramatic way. The question is, do you think, why is this important? Is this shocking that poor people are getting affected by the disease? Are they less resilient? It is not. The point I want to make is that actually we're building cities that allows this to happen, that kind of precondition. This is a picture how public transport has been effective across the world. The cities in Madrid, San Francisco, all kinds of cities. The reason I took this, it are actually cities from across the world. Public transport, because of this, because it's unsafe, because the cities can't work, is actually declined dramatically. It's coming back in Seoul and Tokyo a little bit, but it's dramatically declined. This is a very critical point. Maybe most of you don't use public transport, but public transport is even important in the United States. It's because of this. Because most poor people actually depend on public transport. The number of families in the United States, if it's African-American families, are 5 times more likely to not have a car in the household than a white family in the United States. I don't know if this is surprising. It was very surprising when I found out. 20% of African-American families don't own a car in the United States, because we all think everyone has a car, so why is public transport important? compared to 4% of white families in the United States don't have a car. It's a 5 times difference. So whether public transport of any kind, it doesn't have to be metro, works or not, makes a difference where poor person can get to work, makes a difference of economic resilience of that city. And that is the kind of cities we have developed. And this is true across the world, this idea of access to services. If we have cities without access, then we don't have cities that are resilient. And I just want to emphasize that point of access, mobility, for example, is, you know, the infrastructure we have, the roads, the buses, the trains. That is what the potential for movement. The idea of access is where a particular poor family can get to their work or to the university or the hospital. That is how we feel it should be measured, the ability to get to an opportunity. And if you measure like that, cities across the world are really being built that are not full of access. These are a fantastic set of data we have developed for Mexico City. Kind of shows you how access is different from the richest portion of poverty compared to the poorest. So as you can see, the poorest, the richest have like 54% times more access to parks or cultural spaces or hospitals. So you have a city where the poor population is unable to access services. That makes them resilient. That's why they have more disease. That's why they are able to get to jobs. So the idea that we actually have cities that need to fundamentally shift if we actually want to get a much more resilient city that can be resilient to pandemics. And this is not the last pandemic we are going to face or last crisis. I wanted to end the cities part by saying, you know, at the same time, really interesting, fantastic things happening across the city of this opportunity when people are not moving around. Bogota, for example, this city in Colombia, that has taken the opportunity to rethink their streets. These green things you see on your screen are new bike lanes. They've reconverted roads to bike lanes, and biking and scooters and biking, because they are considered safe during COVID time, has exploded in all over the world. Actually, the United States is very difficult to buy a bike right now. In Bogota, and the city leadership has taken this opportunity to rethink urban space to make it more sustainable, more healthy, and this is happening across the world. Across the world, is Milan, in Amsterdam, in Beijing, London. This political space is a very important indicator of what we could possibly do to take this opportunity to rethink cities. But cities can't do this on their own. Cities really need to work with national governments simply because the finances that needed, but is also part of a system. And I want to talk about that in a minute. But as we think about cities, the cities obviously need to take steps right now to make cities safer, public safety, to make sure jobs come back. Every city mayor I'm talking about is thinking about how we actually economically recover, and how do we target support to the most who've been impacted most. This is the short-term goal, almost every city. But while they do this, they also have to think about the longer-term goals of cities need to do, how they become more resilient, how they become more inclusive, because the lack of inclusion has been the striking feature of what we're seeing. And more as they do these things, how they also become low carbon and more resilient for the future crisis of climate that's coming. All this in the city have to be supported by other forces outside cities, which is national, international community. And why is that important? The important is because of this, because 10 to 20 trillion dollars has been already pledged for recovery across the world. This number, though very impressive, is a very significant number. It means it's very good that the governments are doing that, but it also means in the next few crises there won't be enough money for it. So this money needs to be spent in a way that not only meets this crisis, but also actually prepares us and makes us more resilient for the future that presented. So as you can see, United States have done a fantastic job pledging, so does other countries. The not so good news is this, that if you look at all the pledging that has been done so far and look at how they are pledged, meaning how green it is, how resilient to the future that is. Most of it is the green bars show how green is the stimulus package. You must have read recently, there's a big debate going on European Commission right now about the EU package. But You can see how green or not green they are. In this particular graph, European Union, France, United Kingdom, Germany's package is the most green. United States is actually on the left side of the graph, the third from the left, not very green. This matters a lot, and I'll share that in a minute. If you look at the United States, which I think a lot of you are very familiar with, it is not, and this is just looking at the energy part, which is about 80, 90 billion dollars in the United States. It's actually not very green. And a lot of it is actually focused in United States case in fossil fuels. And in the argument is always made because of this kind of lack of greenness in this is because of jobs, that these will create most jobs. And the evidence shows that this job argument is really not true. If you look at evidence of where per $1 million investment in the first graph on your left is actually investment, the right graph is not new investment, but support to the sector. You can see where for dollar invested, where the jobs are, the most jobs are. Yeah, it's not rocket science. Energy efficiency, building efficiency always have the most returns. Urban transport, higher infrastructure, high-speed rail, et cetera, et cetera. And this looks at where will you get the most bang for the job. These are very important for us to think about as we think about where this investment should go. Funnily enough, this is done by IEA, which shows the employment multiplier, which I found myself very interesting. The pedestrian and bike lanes has the highest employment multiplier compared to others, these are all good multipliers. So it is important to think about. I know jobs gets politically the most attention as it most probably should at this point, but the next step of which investment creates job doesn't really translate or has not translated so far. This is critical though. This is not just a political moment. This money, this next $10 trillion or $20 trillion that will be spent is critical to what's going to happen to the global climate change, simply because this 10 trillion or 20 trillion won't be there again in a short supply. And as you can see from the graph, how that money is spent or how green or not green has a direct correlation whether we will meet the 2 degrees or 1.5 degree Paris goals or not. And right now, it's not looking that positive. Hence, all of us actually have lots to do to make sure from whatever we do, what Denton does, what we do, what all of you do, is to steer at the city level the right investment, but also the national levels that the investments are actually focused. This partnership with cities and national and international is critical simply because cities actually can do a lot of things themselves. But if you look at the right chart, if you don't take energy for outside energy production, they can do about half or 1/3 of the things themselves, about 1/3 they need to with national government, and national government has to do 1/3 of things that happens in cities. But if you take energy, which is a very important part of the discussion, cities actually, national government policies have 60% of things to do. So how national governments, and I say this very clearly for the United States, you can see what's going on right now, is critical for successful outcome in successful cities post-pandemic. I think it's a moment for us to take this for really bold vision to shape this next step, because we have a moment for change. This is a fantastic graphic that comes from New York Times. I don't know if you recognize, this is the FDR Boulevard in the east side of New York, Lower East Side in Manhattan. And this is a point the New York Times is making. This is a time to rethink big infrastructure and rethink a different way of moving and take big steps as New York has taken in the past. And that's what I agree with this. I think this is a time for all of us to think about the moment and how we can come out of it in a different way. I will leave you with this fantastic quote from Financial Times by an Indian author. I don't know if you've read her work, Arundhati Roy, that talks about in a kind of a perspective of a historical perspective of pandemics, that sees this pandemics as a portal. And she argues that we have a choice to make as we go through this pandemic, whether we take our baggage that we have with us, our dead ideas, our dead rivers, and smoky skies, or we walk through it lightly. with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. I think we have that moment right now, and there's a choice for all of us to make what we want to do and what we want to fight for. Back to you, Clint. Thank you very much for the opportunity.